Welcome back. Remember last time we talked about Sneferu, my man, the one who shows Egypt how to build the pyramids, who takes Egypt to another level by international trade, but who is still approachable, who is still a human being about whom we knew something. Well, Sneferu left an incredible legacy. And what I'd like to do now, before we get to our next pharaoh, is bridge the gap. We're going to move forward more than 1,000 years from Sneferu to our next pharaoh. And I want to do a little bit of filling in so it won't be a black hole in your intellect. I would like to say something about the legacy of Sneferu. And the greatest legacy, I think, is his son, the pharaoh Khufu, who goes on to build the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Right? It's not surprising that the son of Sneferu goes on to build perhaps the greatest pyramid ever. He must have been around when all of these pyramids that Sneferu was building were going up. He was there when Maidum, fails. He was there when the bent pyramid has its problems, and finally when the red pyramid is completed. So he goes on and continues this tradition of a building family. His brothers, by the way, are architects of other pyramids. So we certainly have this building family. Now, this period is called the Old Kingdom. It's an artificial name, Old Kingdom. The Egyptians never referred to this period that way. Egyptologists do, because recorded Egyptian history is 3,000 years. We have to break it up into manageable chunks. And the beginning we call the Old Kingdom. We have another period we call the Middle Kingdom, and another period called the New Kingdom. And all the pyramid building, the significant big stone pyramids, take place during the Old Kingdom. It's surprising, most people think of Egypt and you figure, oh, the pyramids, fabulous achievement, must have come at the end of the civilization. No, comes right at the beginning. There's a kind of burst of energy, I think, that look what we can do. We've got a pharaoh who's a god, and we can do anything. And they do. But there's a sad ending to this tale of pyramids. The Old Kingdom collapses. We don't know why. I mean, it would be nice to say, and they continued on and on and on and on and did everything wonderfully. No. For some reason, not recorded, Egyptian civilization collapses at the end of the Old Kingdom. There are several theories. One theory is that pyramid building is what did it. They put so much of their resources into building pyramids that it just couldn't sustain it. I don't think that's right. There's another reverse side to that coin, and it's that because the pharaohs stopped building pyramids, Egypt collapsed because you no longer had jobs for everybody. Now remember also, of course, that the pyramids are not built by slaves. They are built by free labor. They are built by the farmers who during inundation, when their crops are, they can't grow anything, the Nile has overflowed its banks, you got water all over, they have nothing to do. So that's when you marshal the farm and say, all right, farmers, we're building pyramids, you're working on the pyramids for the next 3 months. So it's free labor, and maybe perhaps that you stop building pyramids and all of a sudden you have unemployed people just milling around, they're unhappy. We're not sure what happens to Egypt. But the one thing we're certain of, it collapses at the end of the Old Kingdom. We don't even have records from the period after the Old Kingdom. There are no records. I think what happens is, during this dark period, we have petty princes who are all trying to vie for being pharaoh, and eventually they get their act together. Eventually, Egypt is unified again, and that's the Middle Kingdom. And we get a few centuries of real prosperity. A pharaoh named Mentuhotep unifies Egypt, kind of like Narmer coming from the south again, and he is the king. His descendants, other Mentuhoteps, rule. And they build pyramids, harking back to the good old days. They build pyramids, though, that aren't so grand. They're not made of stone. They're made of mud brick. They can't afford the big pyramids. And then they face them with stone, so it kind of looks like a stone pyramid, but it's not really. And then the Middle Kingdom collapses. This time we know why. Egypt is invaded by foreigners. Now, how can Egypt, this powerhouse, more food than they need, standing army, be defeated by foreigners? The answer is a new military weapon, the chariot. They are invaded by a group of peoples called the Hyksos, which means foreign rulers. And the Hyksos come in with chariots. Egypt doesn't have the horse. They've never had horses in Egypt. And for the first time, the Hyksos come in with horses, chariots, bowmen, and they conquer the Egyptians. And for more than 100 years, you can have Egypt dominated by the Hyksos. But the good news is the Hyksos will be expelled. They will be kicked out. And with the expulsion of the Hyksos, we will have the new kingdom beginning. And our Pharaoh that we're going to talk about today, who is a woman, but I'm not going to call her a queen, I'm going to call her our Pharaoh, is named Hatshepsut. And what I would like to do today is show you how, through Hatshepsut's life, kingship was important to Egypt, and how a woman who's going to rule as king has to deal with three issues. A pharaoh wanted to distinguish himself in three ways. One, battle. Pharaohs liked to do battle. How is a woman going to do that? Building. Pharaohs loved to build, as in pyramids, temples. And then, international trade. Hatshepsut is going to have to deal with these three issues, right? And we're going to use her life to see how pharaohs attempted this. Now, let me say something about her heritage, her family. Her father was a great king, a great king. His name was Thutmose I. He comes at the beginning of this new kingdom. He has seen the history and knows what has happened. He knows that the pyramids of the Old Kingdom, those great stone pyramids, were robbed. They were all robbed at the end of the Old Kingdom when it collapsed. There was no longer a central government, never protected, and people entered the Pharaoh's burial chamber and took the treasures. He also knew that the Middle Kingdom pyramids were robbed. So he's no dope. He's not going to be buried in a pyramid. The era of pyramid building is over. When you think pyramids, think Old Kingdom for the big stone ones, think Middle Kingdom for the mud brick ones, and then when you get to the New Kingdom, don't think pyramid at all. It is over. So, for example, Tutankhamun is not buried in a pyramid, nor is Hatshepsut's father. Hatshepsut's father is the one who comes up with the solution, where to be buried. Thutmose I will not be buried in a pyramid because he knows they are big, hulking rob me signs. They just say, rob me. He decides to be buried in a secluded area, secretly, that can be guarded. Now, where does he choose to be buried? He is the first pharaoh to be buried in the Valley of the Kings. So the Valley of the Kings is an invention of Queen Hatshepsut, who is going to become King Hatshepsut, of her father. We have the tomb of the architect of Thutmose's tomb. His name is Ineni. And on his wall, he put his autobiography. And what noblemen did in the New Kingdom is, when they put their autobiographies, they told of the great things they did for the pharaoh. And the thing that Ineni says he was most proud of is he built the tomb of the pharaoh Thutmose I in a secret place, no one seeing, no one knowing. Now, how can you build a tomb for a pharaoh with no one seeing, no one knowing? This has been a discussion, right, among Egyptologists for quite a while. First, it's the Valley of the Kings. Where is the Valley of the Kings? Imagine a map of Egypt. For most of its history, Egypt had two capitals, one in the south, which was the religious center, and one in the north, which was the administrative center. The administrative center was called Memphis, and it's towards the north near an area of the Delta. But in the south was Thebes. This was the religious center where all the big temples are. This is where Karnak Temple, Luxor Temple were built. And this is where most of the priesthood stayed. Now, right opposite Thebes is the Valley of the Kings, just across the river. Now, remember this. that for almost the entire 3,000 years of Egyptian history, the Egyptians lived on the east bank of the Nile, but were buried on the west bank of the Nile. The reason is that they always associated the west with the dead because the sun sets or dies in the west and is reborn in the east every day. So the west is for the dead. As a matter of fact, when somebody died, they said he went west. And in the same way that we have euphemisms about the dead, we call them the dearly departed. They called a dead person a Westerner. So the West is always for the deceased, and it's not surprising that the Valley of the Kings is on the west bank of the Nile, just opposite Thebes. As its name indicates, it's a valley. And it's an unusual place. It's one of the most striking settings on the planet. Nothing grows there. There is absolutely no water. It is desolate. Humidity, 1920 is the humidity reading. So it's something we're not used to. Nothing grows there. So no one was ever going to live there. You couldn't live there. And it's in this remote, isolated valley that Thutmose I, Hatshepsut's father, decided to have his tomb built. Now, it's desolate. That's good. But also it can be guarded. There's only one entrance to the Valley of the Kings. So you can put guards there and make sure that people don't come and go and rob your tomb. So it's secure, isolated. And the tomb is built by carving into the mountain. It's basically an artificial cave. There's fine white limestone, so you can do your beautiful carvings inside the tomb. And this is where Thutmose I was buried, Hatshepsut's father. Now it's time to talk about Hatshepsut. When Thutmose I died, and he was a great king, doing great things, when he dies, he leaves a son, Thutmose II. And he has a half-sister by another wife, by the great wife, and I'll talk about a great wife in a second, named Hatshepsut. Now, who is going to succeed Thutmose I as pharaoh? The line of succession in Egypt went with the woman. It's matrilineal. Women were powerful in Egypt. They were really powerful. And the way you became pharaoh was not by being the deceased pharaoh's oldest son. You became king by marrying the right woman. Now, what I mean by the right woman is a woman who had pure royal blood flowing through her veins. And let me explain this in terms of the relationships that women could have with a pharaoh. There were 3 different relationships a woman could have with a pharaoh. First, and best, you could be the great wife. Great wife. This in the ancient Egyptian is called the Hemet Weret. Hemet Weret. It means great wife. There's only one great wife. A pharaoh could have plenty of wives, plenty of concubines, but there's only one top banana, and that is the great wife. Now, all the children of the great wife and the pharaoh were the royals. They were pure royal. The second relationship a woman could have with the pharaoh is just a wife. Now, you had all kinds of legal rights, property rights, but you weren't the great wife. You were married, lived in the harem, and were a wife. Third possibility, concubine. Now, don't think of concubine as so diminutive, just a hanger-on, no rights. Under unusual circumstances, the child of a concubine could become king of Egypt even. These were important women, but they weren't wives, and they certainly weren't great wives. And you became pharaoh by marrying the great wife's daughter. That's how you became pharaoh. So, we have the death of Thutmose I, who is going to become pharaoh. Well, he has a son, Thutmose II, but not by the great wife, right? Not by the great wife. And he has a daughter by the great wife, Hatshepsut. So Thutmose II marries Hatshepsut, who is only 12 years old, but she is the right woman. She has the pure blood, royal blood, and Thutmose II becomes pharaoh of Egypt by marrying Hatshepsut. Now, she's 12 years old. He's in his 20s. All indications are it was not a great marriage. Thutmose II, her husband, was not a great king, didn't erect great buildings, didn't lead the army in battle. We even have his mummy, and it doesn't look like a healthy man. But they were married for 20 years. I think it was a long 20 years for Hatshepsut. They had a daughter, right? They had a daughter. And when Thutmose II finally dies, we have the same question. Who's going to be the next king? Well, the answer is that there is a son. There is a son of Thutmose II and another wife who's going to become Thutmose III. But he's only a child. He's maybe 7 years old. So Queen Hatshepsut, who is the widowed queen, becomes regent of Egypt. She decides that she will rule Egypt for a while. She's Queen Hatshepsut until Thutmose III comes of age and can rule by herself. Now, what is this woman going to do? She's ruling Egypt. She can't lead in battle. She doesn't really do that, I don't think. There's an inscription that says she was in Nubia in the south leading the men in battle, but I don't think it's true. But she does build. And she builds a temple that is absolutely unique in Egypt. And I think it's perhaps the most beautiful temple in all of Egypt. It's called Dir el-Bahri. Dir el-Bahri. It means in Arabic, the place of the northern monastery. There used to be monasteries there. You see, Bar, Dir el-Bahri, Bahri. Bar means sea, and the Mediterranean Sea is in the north. So Bahri means northward, seaward, right? There was once a monastery there in later times. And Hatshepsut builds this temple. And on the walls of the temple, she puts basically her autobiography, the things that she is proudest of. Now, remember, she's ruling with Thutmose III. That is, he's really the legitimate king, but he's a kid. So she starts ruling. Now, what does she put on the walls of her temple? What is she most proud of, right? Well, one of the things she talks about is her birth. Every pharaoh is a god. And she talks about her divine birth. Now, she's a woman. How does she get this divine birth? Is she the falcon? Is she this? She says that the god Amun, disguised as her father, Thutmose I, visited her mother, seduced, and that Hatshepsut is the product of this union. So Hatshepsut says, my father is really Amun. This is something that she says. She is royal. Now, and divine. That's one thing she puts on the temple. But the other thing she puts on the temple puzzled early Egyptologists. And let me tell you what happened when Champollion, in the 1820s, now Champollion had just deciphered hieroglyphs. First one to decipher hieroglyphs. He comes to the temple of Dir el-Bahri, looks at it, he can read the hieroglyphs, and he's puzzled. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's looking at it, he sees two kings together. Two. One he knows about, a famous king, Thutmose III. That is the little boy that she is ruling in place of. And there's another king, though. Now, Thutmose III is going to grow up to be a great pharaoh, so he's known by 1820s. But there's another king that Champollion had never heard of. The king's name is Hatshepsut. And he can't figure out the grammar of it, because Hatshepsut is described as sometimes Her Majesty, sometimes as His Majesty, but it's clearly a king wearing the false beard of authority that all pharaohs wear, wearing the kilt, a starched kilt. She is clearly a king, and nobody could figure out what happened. Who is this king, King-et? It's almost as if it's King-et, Her Majesty, His Majesty. They eventually figured out what had happened. After a few years of ruling as regent, as Queen of Egypt, Hatshepsut declared herself king, started to wear the false beard, the crown, the kilt, and ruled as king. Now, what kind of king was she? The answer is a wonderful king. She was great. She did wonderful things, and it's written on the walls of Deir el-Bahari. What does she do? One of the things she is most proud of is sending a trading expedition. It's back to Sneferu and international power. Now, sending a trading expedition to where she sent one was a big deal. The expedition went to the land of Punt, P-U-N-T. Now, we are not 100% sure where Punt was. We think it may have been where modern Eritrea is, near Ethiopia. It may even have been Somalia. But we know how they got there, and it wasn't easy. She is ruling out of Thebes. And to get to the land of Punt, you had to go across a place called the Wadi Hammamat. You had to carry your boats to the Red Sea. Then you sailed on the Red Sea southward till you got to Punt. It was a big deal. It was 15 days, 600 miles. Now remember, though, they're going to hug the coast because the Egyptians aren't good sailors. But they're hugging the coast, and then they get to the land of Punt. Now, on the walls of Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut shows the land of Punt. This is the first accurate depiction of sub-Saharan Africa in the world. It's an anthropological expedition, practically. She shows the houses. They are on stilts, thatched roofs on stilts. And she shows the queen of Punt greeting the expedition. And the queen is shown as absolutely obese, as if she has elephantiasis. And so does her daughter, right? So we're getting wonderful, accurate details about the land of Punt. And the walls of her temple also show what they're bringing back. They are bringing back ivory, incense, frankincense, and myrrh, which were called what the gods like to smell, what the gods like to smell. And they come back to Thebes successful with all the goods of the land of Punt. So she is very proud of this great trading expedition. Another thing she is especially proud of is erecting obelisks at Karnak Temple. Now, an obelisk is something that is purely Egyptian, an Egyptian invention. It is a monolith, one stone. They are big. The big ones are more than 100 feet tall. More than 100 feet tall, weigh 250 tons. So it was a big deal to quarry an obelisk. And she erected 4 at Karnak Temple at Thebes. And on the temple walls, it shows Hatshepsut sending the boats out to Aswan. Now, Aswan is the southern border of Egypt, just before Nubia. This is where there are quarries of pink granite. Every obelisk in Egypt comes out of that quarry, pink granite. It's the only stone strong enough to have a long single shaft. And it shows us the obelisks coming back. She quarried a pair, and on the temple it says, "I quarried and erected 2 obelisks in 7 months." So within 7 months, she quarried these huge stones and had them brought back and erected at Karnak. And on the wall, it shows the boats bringing them back. And I'll tell you, it's not the way you would think. The 2 obelisks are shown end to end on a single barge. So you have 500,000 tons of stone on one barge, end to end, and it's being towed by 22 other ships. But remember, it's going with the current, so it's not quite so tough. It's going with the current from Aswan northward to Thebes. So she quarries these fabulous obelisks. Interesting thing about obelisks, by the way, they were not quarried with chisels and hammers. If you look at obelisks, there are no chisel marks on them. They were pounded out with stone pounders, balls that weigh about 10 pounds, and they're made out of dolerite, which is a harder material than granite. And what they did was they took men, line them up along where the obelisk is going to be, just they kept dropping them and dropping them and dropping them until it chips away a little bit, and you get it out of the quarry. So they were pounded out. I mean, an amazing achievement. To this day, we do not know how they erected the obelisks. There are no records of how they erected them. We think they may have hauled them up a sand ramp, and then you kind of slide it down the sand ramp onto its base. And I'll tell you the most amazing thing about obelisks. When you look at an obelisk in Egypt, the only thing that keeps an obelisk on its pedestal is gravity. They're balanced. There is no pins, there is no groove. They are simply so perfectly machined that they stand erect with nothing supporting them. Pretty impressive. And if you want to see the tallest obelisk in Egypt, go to Karnak Temple. Hatshepsut's obelisk is still standing there, the tallest obelisk in all of Egypt. So Hatshepsut is doing wonderful things. Now she has to have a tomb. Well, she built one as queen near the Valley of the Kings. She couldn't be buried in the Valley of the Kings. She was only the king's great wife, but she had her tomb near the Valley of the Kings. But once she declares herself Pharaoh and wears the beard of authority and the crown, she starts building her own tomb in the Valley of the Kings. And that's where she's going to be buried, in the Valley of the Kings. It is the longest tomb in the entire Valley of the Kings. It's an amazing tomb. It goes deep, deep, deep. And the workmen hit bad rock and had to change it and move it and wiggles around. But she was buried in Hatshepsut's tomb. And there are two sarcophagi in the Valley of the Kings. Two. One is hers, and the other is her father's. She moved her father's burial to her tomb. Notice, it's not her husband's, it's not Thutmose II's, it's Thutmose I's. And I think she really didn't care about Thutmose II. Never mentions in her entire reign, never mentions her husband, ever. She liked to be near Dad, the great pharaoh, and she identified with him. So in the Valley of the Kings is Hatshepsut's tomb, buried next to her father. Now, she was a great, great, great ruler. But I have to say something about a man that's part of her life. Now, she was widowed and never remarried. Queens don't remarry in ancient Egypt. But there is a commoner who is a big part of her life. His name is Senmut. Senmut. And some people think they were so close that he was her lover. I'll tell you about that. Senmut has more titles than anybody in Egypt. He is the overseer of the works, meaning he's in charge of building projects. He is the steward of the temple of Amun, which means he's in charge of the treasury of Amun, which is vast. He is the royal tutor, which means that he is tutoring the daughter of Hatshepsut and Thutmose II. He is also steward of the palace. He's in charge of the palace. This guy was a commoner. How does he get so many titles? One little bit of evidence that he may have been her lover. There is a graffito in a cave near her temple of Dir el-Bahri. And it shows a naked female. And she's got a crown on with a cobra on it, which is the sign of the king. So it's a female naked with a crown. Good bet it's Hatshepsut. And she is making love to somebody who has the overseer's cap, the overseer of the works cap on, Senmut. So at least, this is probably scribbled on the wall by a couple of workmen saying, aha, Hatshepsut and Senmut, we know about them. So they really may have been lovers. Senmut is buried in a fabulous tomb right next to Dir el-Bahri. Right next to Dir el-Bahri. And his tomb goes towards the Valley of the Kings, and her tomb goes towards Dir el-Bahri, and it's almost like they wanted to be together for eternity. In the end, Hatshepsut dies. And the sad thing is, her name is erased from every monument. There are no records of Hatshepsut that are really significant. If you had asked, say, Queen Cleopatra, who was Hatshepsut, she never would have heard of her. There were kings lists listing all the kings of Egypt, but you'll never get Hatshepsut's name on it. Why was her name erased? Well, when Thutmose III became pharaoh, he waited quite a while. But then he erased her name from Dir el-Bahri, from every place it appeared. And I think the reason was that Egypt, which is a very, very conservative country, never wanted it recorded that a woman had ruled Egypt as pharaoh. It wasn't out of hatred. Many people think, Thutmose III hated Hatshepsut because she pushed him aside and she ruled. No, all indications were it was an agreeable arrangement where she would rule as he was younger. But I think Egypt just simply didn't want it known that they'd had a woman who ruled as king. Next time, we'll talk about a different pharaoh. See you then.